Maplewood, Ohio was the kind of town where afternoons moved slowly. The streets were lined with maple trees older than most of the houses, and the air always seemed to carry the faint scent of cut grass. It was the type of neighborhood where children rode their bikes without worry and dogs napped lazily on shaded porches. 10-year-old Lily Harper loved those quiet afternoons more than anything. School had just ended for the summer, and freedom felt endless. She sat cross-legged on the front lawn of her family's pale blue house, braiding tiny wildflowers into a chain. Beside her lay Buddy, her golden retriever, his thick fur glowing in the sunlight. Buddy wasn't just a dog. He had been Lily's birthday surprise 3 years earlier, just before her father deployed overseas again. While Colonel Daniel Harper traveled to dangerous places most people only saw on the news, Buddy became Lily's constant companion. He slept beside her bed, waited for her after school, followed her from room to room as if protecting her from invisible dangers. That afternoon, Buddy rested his head on her lap, sighing contentedly. "Dad would have loved today," Lily said softly, scratching behind his ears. "He says sunshine like this is wasted indoors." Buddy's tail thumped twice against the grass, as if agreeing. Across the street, Mrs. Callahan watered her roses. A delivery truck hummed in the distance. Somewhere, wind chimes sang lazily. It felt safe. Until it didn't. The first police cruiser turned onto Maple Street so quietly that Lily barely noticed. Then a second followed. Tires rolled slowly over asphalt. Doors didn't slam. No sirens screamed. But the presence changed the air. Mrs. Callahan stopped watering her roses. Lily looked up, confused. Police cars didn't usually come to their street. Maplewood was known for minor noise complaints and lost pets, not emergencies. Buddy lifted his head, ears twitching. 2 officers stepped out of the first cruiser. One rested his hand near his holster. The other scanned the houses like he was searching for something dangerous. Lily stood slowly. "Hi," she called politely, the way her mother taught her to greet adults. One of the officers approached. His expression was tight, jaw clenched. "Is that your dog?" he asked. Lily nodded. "Yes, sir, this is Buddy." The officer glanced at Buddy, then at his partner. "We received a call about an aggressive loose dog in the area." Lily blinked. "He's not loose, he's right here." Buddy stood up, tail wagging gently. He barked once, not aggressively, just alert. The kind of bark that said, "Strangers are here." Across the street, a door opened slightly. A neighbor Lily barely recognized stood watching. The second officer moved closer, posture stiff. "Ma'am, please step back," he said. Lily frowned. "Why?" The first officer's voice sharpened. "Step away from the dog." Buddy sensed the tension. He moved instinctively closer to Lily, positioning himself slightly in front of her, not threatening, protective. Lily reached down and grabbed his collar. "It's okay," she whispered to him. "They're just talking." But the officers didn't see it that way. "Sir, he's fine," Lily insisted, her voice trembling now. "He doesn't bite, he's friendly. Everyone knows him." Buddy wagged his tail again, looking from Lily to the officers. Then something shifted. The first officer took a step back. His hand tightened on his weapon. "Dog's advancing," he muttered. He was. Buddy had taken 2 small steps forward, toward Lily, when she moved. "Buddy, come," Lily called, her voice high with confusion. Buddy obeyed instantly, trotting toward her. The officer drew his gun. The movement was so sudden that Lily didn't understand what was happening. "No," she screamed. The shot exploded through the quiet street. Birds scattered from trees. A car alarm down the block began wailing. Buddy yelped once, a sharp, shocked sound before collapsing into the grass. For half a second, the world went completely silent. Then Lily's scream tore through Maplewood. She dropped to her knees beside him. "Buddy, Buddy, get up." His golden fur, darkened rapidly beneath her hands. Across the street, Mrs. Callahan gasped, dropping the hose. Water sprayed wildly across the sidewalk. Someone shouted, "What did you do?" A phone was raised, recording. The officer stood frozen, weapon still extended. His partner looked stunned. "He charged," the officer said quickly, almost defensively. "He charged." "He didn't," Lily sobbed. "He did, he was coming to me." Buddy's breathing grew shallow. His tail twitched once. Lily pressed her forehead against him. "Please don't leave me." Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold him. Neighbors began gathering, voices rising in disbelief. "That dog never hurt anyone. He plays with my grandkids. Why would you shoot?" The officer holstered his weapon, but his face remained rigid. "Ma'am, please step back." "No," Lily screamed. "You already hurt him." The second officer radioed something in, words about threat neutralized. Threat. The word hung in the air like poison. Buddy wasn't a threat. He was a birthday gift, a bedtime companion, a friend who waited by the door every evening. Within minutes, more patrol cars arrived. An animal control vehicle followed. But it was too late. Buddy stopped moving. Lily's cries softened into broken whispers. Mrs. Callahan wrapped a trembling arm around her shoulders, but Lily barely noticed. Across the street, the neighbor who had been watching quietly retreated inside and closed the door. The officer repeated his statement several times. The dog charged. Yet multiple phones had captured the scene. Captured Buddy's tail wagging. Captured Lily calling him. Captured the distance between them. One of the bystanders whispered, "This isn't going away." And it didn't. As paramedics gently tried to guide Lily away from Buddy, she clung to his fur. "Please don't take him," she begged. Finally, exhausted, she let go. The late afternoon sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the lawn, including the small, still shape now being carried away. Maplewood was no longer quiet. That evening the Harper house felt hollow. Lily sat on her bedroom floor, staring at Buddy's empty bed. His favorite red ball rested untouched in the corner. Her mother, Sarah, stood in the doorway, eyes swollen from crying. She held her phone tightly. "Your dad's calling," she said softly. Lily didn't move. Sarah stepped outside to answer. Thousands of miles away, in a military operations room filled with maps and quiet tension, Colonel Daniel Harper stepped into a private hallway. "What happened?" he asked. His wife tried to speak calmly, but her voice cracked. "They shot Buddy." There was a long silence. Daniel closed his eyes. He had heard gunshots in deserts and mountains. He had commanded missions in places most Americans would never see. He had prepared men and women for life-or-death decisions. But nothing prepared him for this. "Was Lily there?" he asked quietly. "Yes." Another silence. "Is she safe?" "She's devastated." Daniel inhaled slowly. "Send me the video," he said. When he watched it minutes later, he didn't shout. He didn't curse. He replayed it twice. Measured. Analyzing. The distance, the movement, the timing. This wasn't chaos. It was a decision. And decisions had consequences. Back in Maplewood, night fell heavily over the street. Porch lights flickered on. Curtains twitched as neighbors whispered. Online, the video began spreading beyond Ohio. Strangers were watching Lily scream. Comment sections exploded. Arguments ignited. But inside the Harper house, none of that mattered. Lily lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The house felt too quiet without soft paws moving down the hallway. She whispered into the darkness, "I'm sorry, Buddy." Miles away, Colonel Daniel Harper booked the first available flight home. The deadliest commander in the field was coming back to Maplewood. And he wasn't returning for war. He was returning for the truth. The flight back to Ohio was long, but Daniel Harper didn't sleep. His mind replayed the video over and over, frame by frame. Buddy's wagging tail, Lily's small hands reaching out, the sudden flash of gunfire. Nothing about it suggested danger. Nothing about it suggested a threat. He had faced ambushes in deserts, night raids in jungles, firefights where every decision meant life or death. He had led men under fire. Civilians had depended on his judgment. Yet here he was, thousands of miles from the battlefield, powerless to protect the one thing that mattered most to him, his daughter. The news had already arrived at Maplewood. By the time Daniel touched down at the small, regional airport, his phone was overflowing with alerts. Notifications from news apps, texts from concerned friends, and messages from distant military colleagues poured in. Everyone was talking about the viral video of a police officer shooting a dog. The story was being shared on national media, trending on social networks, and sparking debates about police accountability, gun safety, and animal rights. Daniel's jaw tightened as he scanned the clips. They had caught everything. The moment the officer raised his weapon, the tiny bark from Buddy, the panic in Lily's eyes. By now, thousands of people across the country had already formed opinions. Some defended the officer, claiming fear justified the shot. Others condemned him, insisting it was a tragic but preventable mistake. But Daniel didn't care about the opinions. Not yet. He only cared about the facts. When he reached the Harper home, he found a somber scene. His wife, Sarah, sat on the couch, hands clasped tightly around a mug of tea that had gone cold. Lily was perched on the edge of her bed, her small fingers tracing Buddy's empty collar. She hadn't spoken since the funeral of her beloved dog, which had been held quietly in the backyard that afternoon. The neighbors had sent flowers, left notes, but nothing could fill the space Buddy had left behind. "Dad," Lily whispered when she saw him. Her voice was brittle, almost breaking under the weight of her grief. Daniel knelt to her level. He didn't reach for her immediately. He let her process his presence, let her realize that he had come, that she was safe. "Hey, Pumpkin," he said softly, "I'm here." Lily's eyes filled with tears. They shot him, Dad," she said, voice shaking. "Right in front of me. Why would they do that? He didn't." "I know," Daniel interrupted gently. "I saw the video. I know, Lily." Her hands clutched his shirt. "I wanted to protect him. I tried. "You did everything right, sweetheart," he said. His voice was steady, but inside a storm raged. He had trained himself to control emotion under the deadliest circumstances, but this was different. This was home. And here the rules weren't clear. Here he wasn't a commander in the field. He was a father, and his child had lost her best friend in an instant. Sarah came closer and placed a comforting hand on Daniel's shoulder. "The footage, it's spreading," she said softly. "People are watching. News stations, social media, everyone knows." Daniel nodded. "I've seen. And that's exactly why we need to handle this correctly. No rash decisions. No anger. Facts first, procedure second. I need the full report, every detail." That night, the Harper living room became a temporary operations center. Daniel spread out the videos on his laptop, slowed them down frame by frame, and compared the officer's movement with Buddy. Every motion, every step, every bark. He made notes, timestamps, and observed what he already knew in his gut. Buddy had done nothing to justify lethal force. Meanwhile, the video had already caught national attention. News outlets described it as tragic and controversial, posting slow-motion replays and analysis from animal behavior experts. Online comment sections overflowed with outrage, sadness, and debate. Animal rights groups called for immediate investigations. Local authorities were inundated with calls demanding accountability. Social media accounts dedicated to police accountability, and dog lovers alike shared the footage endlessly. By the end of the night, hashtags like Justice for Buddy and Maplewood shooting were trending. Daniel didn't engage online. He didn't need to. He understood the power of perception, the danger of reacting emotionally in public. If there was one thing his years in the military had taught him, it was patience, strategy, observation. This wasn't a battlefield where bullets flew randomly. This was a battlefield of information, perception, and law. He had to act carefully. The next morning, Maplewood woke to a town divided. At school, Lily's classmates whispered as she walked by. Some offered sympathetic looks, others avoided her entirely, unsure what to say. She remained quiet, hugging her notebook tightly. Buddy's absence was a constant, sharp presence. Across town, the police department released an official statement. An officer responded to a report of an aggressive dog. The officer acted in accordance with standard protocol and reported that he feared for his safety. An internal investigation has been initiated. The statement angered many. The video, however, told a different story. Social media and local news outlets began juxtaposing the statement with the footage, showing clearly that Buddy was not aggressive, that Lily had tried to call him back, and that the dog had been moving toward her protectively rather than threateningly. By mid-morning, protesters began gathering outside the Maplewood Police Department. Signs read "Justice for Buddy," "Protect our children," and "Accountability now." The small town, previously known for its serenity, now felt tense. Officers patrolled quietly, wary of the growing crowd. Inside the Harper home, Daniel called in an attorney he trusted, someone experienced in civil rights and police oversight. He requested the officers' full reports, 911 call records, and any other official documentation. The goal was simple: facts first, then accountability. Lily watched her father organize the chaos with precision. "Dad, what are you going to do?" she asked, her voice timid. Daniel knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We're going to make sure the truth comes out, Lily. That's what matters. Not anger, not revenge, truth, justice." She nodded slowly. Her small hands clutched the remnants of Buddy's favorite toy, a squeaky red ball. "I just want everyone to know Buddy didn't do anything wrong," she whispered. "He knows that," Daniel said softly, hugging her. "And soon everyone else will too." Outside, Maplewood buzzed with chatter. News vans set up cameras, neighbors debated heatedly on lawns, and online posts multiplied by the minute. It was becoming a story far larger than any small Ohio town had anticipated. But in the Harper house, Daniel focused on his daughter. She was the one who had seen the worst of it. She was the one who needed guidance, reassurance, and a reminder that even when the world seemed unfair, the right actions could make a difference. He glanced at the video one more time before closing the laptop. Buddy lay still in the grass, but the image burned in his mind, not as a memory of loss, but as a call to action. Miles away from deserts, jungles, and battlefields, Colonel Daniel Harper realized that this fight, protecting his child and standing for justice, was one he couldn't delegate. And he wouldn't fail. Because this wasn't just about a dog, this was about truth. And Daniel Harper always fought for the truth. The plane touched down at Cleveland Hopkins International Airport just after dusk. The air outside was crisp, carrying the faint scent of lake water mixed with city smog. Colonel Daniel Harper stepped onto the tarmac, his posture as rigid and precise as it had always been on deployment. But inside, his thoughts churned with a storm no battlefield had ever prepared him for. He didn't wait for the luggage carousel. He didn't pause to collect the whispers of travelers watching the uniformed man walking with quiet authority. Instead, he moved straight to the car waiting in the VIP lane. His mind replayed the footage again, the bright golden fur, the wagging tail, the tiny bark, the gunshot. Every second was etched into him, as vivid as any firefight he had survived. The drive home was silent, except for the occasional click of the turn signal. Maplewood streets felt familiar yet alien. Streetlights cast long shadows over neat sidewalks. Children rode bikes in driveways, unaware of the turmoil that had descended on one of their neighbors. Shops were closing for the night. In a small town like Maplewood, everyone would soon know. When Daniel turned onto his street, he saw a small crowd gathered near the Harper home. Neighbors whispered behind hands, some holding smartphones. Some waved. Others looked away, uncomfortable with the sudden attention. A police car remained parked at the end of the block, its lights off but its presence undeniable. Daniel didn't flinch. He parked the car and stepped out. His boots hit the pavement firmly, echoing slightly against the quiet night. His eyes scanned the yard. There, on the front lawn, sat a small cluster of flowers left by neighbors, taped notes, and a single framed photo of Buddy. His chest tightened, and for the first time that day, he allowed himself a flicker of anger. Not at the officers, not yet, but at the cruelty of the world that had allowed his daughter to lose her companion in such a senseless way. Sarah Harper opened the door as he approached. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice thick. She tried to smile, but it faltered. "Thank you for coming so fast." Daniel reached for her hand, giving it a brief squeeze. "I promised her I'd come," he said quietly. Then he looked past her to the house and finally to his daughter. Lily Harper stood near the porch steps. She was small, fragile-looking, clutching Buddy's empty collar to her chest. Her eyes, usually bright and lively, were dull, rimmed with the red of endless tears. For a moment she didn't see her father. She was frozen, caught in the memory of the shot of Buddy collapsing, of helplessness that even she couldn't escape. "Lily," Daniel called gently. Her head lifted slowly. Recognition flickered, then relief. She ran toward him, tears spilling down her face, stumbling slightly over the uneven pavement. Daniel bent down to meet her halfway, wrapping his arms around her as she buried her face against his chest. "I'm here," he said, his voice steady, yet soft enough to cradle her trembling form. "I'm here, Pumpkin, I've got you." I tried," Lily choked out, her words muffled by his uniform. "I tried to protect him. I called him, but they." Daniel's heart ached at her small voice, full of grief and guilt she shouldn't bear. He held her tighter. "Lily," he said slowly, "you did everything you could. Buddy knew you loved him, that's all that matters. And now we make sure his story is heard. That's the best way to honor him." Sarah stood a few steps back, silently watching as Daniel and Lily shared their private moment. She could see the intensity in Daniel's eyes, the same intensity that had earned him a reputation as one of the most strategic and disciplined commanders in the U.S. military. But tonight, it wasn't military strategy or battlefield tactics that mattered. It was the careful, measured way he guided his daughter through the chaos of her grief. Finally, Lily pulled back, resting her forehead against his chest. Are they going to pay for what they did?" she whispered. Daniel knelt slightly so his eyes met hers. "This isn't about revenge," he said firmly. "It's about truth. Justice isn't about making someone hurt the way we do. It's about making sure wrongs are corrected and nothing like this happens again. That's what we'll focus on." Her small nod was almost imperceptible, but it was enough. For the first time since the shot, Lily felt a flicker of hope. Inside the house, the living room had been transformed into an impromptu command center. Daniel opened his laptop, connecting to the files he had already downloaded from the plane. The police bodycam footage, the 911 call, the viral videos, every frame, every sound, every timestamp. He analyzed the officer's position, Buddy's movement, Lily's actions. His mind, trained for precise calculations under life-and-death conditions, went to work systematically. "The officer didn't follow protocol," Daniel muttered to himself, noting the officer's stance, the lack of warning shots, and the proximity of Buddy to Lily. This was not justifiable. Sarah, still standing behind him, placed a hand on his shoulder. "What are you going to do?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the laptop. Daniel looked up. "We're going to make sure the investigation is thorough," he said. "We get an attorney, we request all reports, we gather witnesses, and we present the facts clearly, no exaggerations, no emotional bias, just truth." Sarah nodded, and Lily. She stays protected, she stays safe. That's priority one, he replied. Lily, sitting quietly on the couch, was absorbing every word. She realized that her father wasn't just a soldier overseas. He was a strategist, a problem solver, a man who could face danger calmly and decisively. And now she understood that the same mind that had commanded troops in combat would command justice for Buddy. Hours passed. Daniel worked late into the night, contacting his attorney, outlining strategy, reviewing evidence. Every detail mattered. Every step had to be precise. One misstep could turn public opinion, complicate the investigation, and prevent the truth from emerging. Meanwhile, the town of Maplewood buzzed with growing tension. The viral video of Buddy's shooting had sparked online debates, petitions, and calls for accountability. Local news stations ran the footage repeatedly, dissecting every second. Neighbors whispered in grocery stores and at bus stops. Opinions divided sharply. Some believed the officer had acted out of fear. Others argued the shooting was reckless and unnecessary. But Daniel Harper didn't allow himself to be distracted by public opinion. He understood perception, the influence of narrative, and the dangers of reacting without strategy. Years in the military had taught him patience, observation, and the power of methodical action. Now, those lessons applied not to a battlefield overseas, but to the front lawn of his daughter's grief. Finally, near midnight, he closed the laptop. He turned to Lily, who had fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted from crying and anxiety. He gently carried her to her bedroom, tucking her in and placing Buddy's empty collar on the nightstand. "Tomorrow," he whispered, brushing her hair from her face, "we start the fight the right way. We honor Buddy and we protect you. That's our mission." Sarah watched silently from the doorway, knowing that the man who had faced enemy fire for 20 years was now confronting a new kind of battle, one fought with strategy, patience, and relentless pursuit of truth. Outside, Maplewood slept uneasily. The streets were quiet, but the air was heavy with anticipation. A decorated commander had returned, not to war, but to defend justice at home. And for the first time since the shooting, Lily's small world felt as though it might begin to heal. Because if there was one thing Colonel Daniel Harper had proven time and time again, it was this: no matter the odds, no matter the challenge, he never left anyone behind. Not on the battlefield. Not in his own backyard. Not his daughter. And certainly not Buddy. By the next morning, Maplewood had changed. The quiet, tree-lined streets and familiar sidewalks seemed smaller, suffocating under the weight of whispers, smartphones, and news vans. The video of Buddy's shooting had exploded online. In classrooms, grocery stores, and local cafes, the small Ohio town buzzed with debate. Opinions were polarized. Some defended the officer, citing fear and protocol. Others, a growing majority, decried the action as reckless, unnecessary, and cruel. Lily Harper stayed inside her bedroom, staring out the window at the bright sunlight, her eyes hollow. The walls were adorned with Buddy's favorite toys, now silent witnesses to the grief in the house. Each memory felt sharper, more immediate. Her mother, Sarah, moved quietly around the kitchen, preparing breakfast that neither of them would eat. Daniel Harper, still in his uniform, had spent the night reviewing every detail of the case. He had downloaded bodycam footage, cross-referenced timestamps, and compared the viral videos to the official police statements. Nothing matched. The department's narrative that Buddy had charged aggressively was a lie, a misrepresentation of what had happened. Daniel didn't rush to social media. He didn't issue statements. He wasn't a civilian looking for attention. He was a strategist. Every move had to be deliberate, every action precise. By mid-morning, protesters began gathering in front of the Maplewood Police Department. The crowd started small, local residents holding handmade signs. "Justice for Buddy, protect our children, accountability now." By lunchtime, the number had grown. High school students joined, their voices hoarse from chanting. Animal lovers from nearby towns drove in, parking their cars along the quiet streets. News vans appeared, cameras trained on the growing throng, microphones held up to capture every shout, every tear, every declaration of outrage. Inside the Harper home, Daniel and Sarah watched through the laptop. Lily hovered nearby, silent, observing the expressions of anger, grief, and frustration on the faces of the crowd. For the first time, she realized that Buddy's story had transcended their backyard. It was no longer just her loss. It had become Maplewood's concern and soon, the nation's. Daniel dialed the attorney he had contacted the night before. "We need all 911 call records, full officer reports, and internal department files," he said, voice calm but commanding. "We're going to build a case based on fact, not emotion." The attorney confirmed immediately. "We'll get them, and we'll also want to contact witnesses. Neighbors, friends, anyone who saw what happened. Every testimony counts." Daniel nodded. "Good, and I want to ensure Lily is safe. She's our top priority." By the afternoon, Maplewood's police department released an official statement, attempting to clarify the situation. The wording was cautious. An officer responded to a report of an aggressive dog. He acted in accordance with department procedure. An internal investigation is underway. The statement did nothing to calm the town. Online, social media exploded. Videos of Buddy wagging his tail, of Lily calling to him, were juxtaposed with the department's claim of aggression. Tweets, posts, and comments poured in by the thousands. The hashtags Justice for Buddy and Maplewood shooting dominated feeds. Animal rights organizations and community advocacy groups demanded accountability. Neighbors on Maple Street debated heatedly. Mrs. Callahan, the woman who had first seen the officers arrive, told anyone who would listen, "That dog never hurt anyone. He played with my grandchildren. Why would they do this?" Others, including some longtime residents, felt conflicted. "The officer might have been scared," one man said quietly. "It's easy to second-guess when you watch it on video, but in the moment." Arguments flared on lawns, in grocery stores, and even at the local coffee shop. Maplewood, a town that had prided itself on harmony, found itself suddenly divided. Inside the Harper home, Daniel remained a pillar of calm. He called for a meeting with his attorney and Sarah in the living room. "We will not react emotionally," he said. "We will not be distracted by opinions or protests. We gather facts. We ensure justice. That is our mission." Sarah nodded, exhausted but reassured. "What about the town, the media?" she asked. Daniel shook his head. "Let them talk. Our focus is inside these walls. Lily's well-being, the investigation, accuracy, everything else is noise." Lily, sitting quietly, finally spoke. "Dad, they're saying things about me online. People are blaming me." Daniel's eyes softened. He knelt beside her, taking her small hands in his own. "People always talk when they don't have the full story," he said gently. "You did nothing wrong. Buddy knew you loved him, that's what matters. And we're going to make sure the truth comes out. That's what really counts." By evening, reporters had set up cameras on Maple Street. They interviewed neighbors and passers-by. Some spoke passionately about Buddy, others hesitated, fearful of saying the wrong thing. Yet the story had gone far beyond local news. National networks had begun covering the shooting, framing it as a debate about police use of force, community safety, and animal rights. Daniel, fully aware of the growing attention, remained in the background. He didn't want to speak yet. The strategy, he knew, was patience. Meanwhile, Sarah set up a small area in the backyard where Lily could begin memorializing Buddy. She placed flowers, photographs, and Buddy's favorite toys, creating a shrine that felt peaceful yet bittersweet. Lily knelt there for hours, placing small stones around the grass where Buddy had fallen. It became her way of processing grief, and Daniel watched silently, understanding the importance of ritual and memory. That night the family gathered in the living room. Daniel had printed transcripts of witness statements, 911 recordings, and the preliminary officer reports. Together, they reviewed them. Lily sat quietly beside her father, Sarah at his other side. Each page revealed more inconsistencies. The 911 call had exaggerated Buddy's movements. The officer's statement contradicted bodycam footage in several areas. Daniel's jaw tightened as he read, but his mind remained calm. Years of battlefield experience had trained him to assess threats, analyze intelligence, and plan operations methodically. This was no different. The difference was the battlefield. Here, the enemy was misinformation and bureaucracy, and his objective was truth. "Tomorrow," he said finally, "we start reaching out to witnesses. We document everything. Every neighbor, every passerby, every recording. Nothing gets overlooked. We ensure the facts speak for themselves." Lily looked up. "And will it make them admit they were wrong?" Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder. "Not immediately, but eventually the truth always comes out. That's the power of facts. That's how justice works." Outside, Maplewood slept uneasily. Streetlights flickered over empty roads, but the tension lingered. The shooting had changed the town forever, dividing neighbors and igniting debates that would not end quickly. Yet inside the Harper home, a different battle was being waged, a battle for justice, truth, and the memory of a golden retriever whose life had been cut tragically short. Daniel Harper, decorated commander of countless operations and survivor of wars most Americans would never know, had returned home not to fight a war abroad, but to defend his daughter and the dog she loved. And he would not fail. Because the greatest missions, he had learned over decades, were not always fought on foreign soil. Sometimes they were fought in small towns, in quiet neighborhoods, in the hearts of those we loved. And for Lily Harper and Buddy's memory, he would fight with everything he had. By the third day after the shooting, Maplewood was no longer the quiet, leafy town it had been. News vans crowded the streets. Cameras perched on rooftops, tripods lining lawns, and reporters jostled for interviews. Signs reading "Justice for Buddy" and "Accountability Now" were everywhere, held high by protesters who had grown louder with each passing hour. Social media exploded with posts, hashtags, and debates about police accountability. The story had gone national, and everyone had an opinion. Inside the Harper home, Daniel Harper watched quietly from the living room, his fingers steepled in thought. Beside him, Sarah tried to maintain a calm front, though her eyes betrayed exhaustion. Lily sat on the couch, knees pulled to her chest, staring at Buddy's empty collar as if it contained some hidden answer. "Dad," Lily's voice was soft, hesitant, "are they going to release the video today?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the laptop screen. "Yes," he said finally, "but we need to stay focused. The video doesn't change facts, it just shows them." When the bodycam footage was released that afternoon, Maplewood seemed to hold its breath. Daniel and Lily, along with their attorney, viewed the footage frame by frame. The first shot caught Buddy standing calmly beside Lily, tail wagging gently. He wasn't barking aggressively. He wasn't lunging. The officer's hand twitched near the holster, the weapon aimed before any threatening action occurred. The next frames captured the gunshot and the moment Buddy collapsed. Lily screamed, falling to the grass beside her friend. Daniel noted every detail, every movement, every misrepresentation. He saw the distance between officer and dog, calculated the timing of the shot, and realized with growing certainty that the department's claim of aggression was false. Outside, neighbors gathered in small groups, smartphones in hand. Some played the video aloud. Gasps and whispers filled the air. "He didn't move toward her," one woman said. "He was running to her." Social media erupted. Animal rights groups analyzed the footage, posting expert commentary on how Buddy's movements were protective, not aggressive. Pet trainers created side-by-side videos to demonstrate the dog's behavior. Local news stations aired slow-motion replays, showing clearly that Buddy had done nothing to justify lethal force. Daniel watched, not reacting with anger but with the calm precision that had made him one of the country's most respected commanders. He paused the footage repeatedly, noting inconsistencies in the officer's statement, the 911 call and eyewitness accounts. This wasn't chaos. It was a clear violation of protocol. He turned to Sarah. "We have everything we need," he said. "Now we document, we gather witnesses, we ensure the evidence is indisputable, nothing else matters." Meanwhile, Lily had moved closer to the screen, tears streaming silently. They lied," she whispered. "They said he charged me, but he didn't. He was protecting me." Daniel knelt beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "I know, Pumpkin, and that's why we'll make them see the truth. Buddy's story isn't over. It's just beginning." The town's reaction was immediate. Within hours of the footage being released, petitions were launched. Over 50,000 signatures demanded the officer's suspension pending a full investigation. Local schools held assemblies to discuss safety, empathy, and responsibility. Animal welfare organizations offered support to the Harper family and promoted awareness campaigns. Inside the Harper home, Daniel coordinated with his attorney to plan the next steps. Witnesses had to be identified, statements taken, and inconsistencies highlighted. They contacted neighbors who had filmed the initial moments, residents who had seen the officer approach, and even local children who had played in the yard that day. Every voice mattered. Every piece of evidence reinforced the truth. As the evening approached, Daniel walked outside. The sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across Maplewood streets. The protests had swelled. Voices rang out, chants of justice for Buddy echoing through the small town. Reporters filmed crowds waving signs and holding vigils in Buddy's memory. Daniel inhaled deeply, thinking of the many battles he had fought. Not all were on foreign soil, not all involved weapons. Some battles were fought with patience, strategy, and moral clarity. This was one of them. He knew he had to remain focused, to keep Lily and Sarah safe, and to make sure that the truth prevailed over public misinformation. Inside the house, Lily began creating a scrapbook dedicated to Buddy. Photographs, drawings, and small mementos were glued to each page. Daniel watched silently. It was her way of processing the loss, of reclaiming a sense of control over the chaos. He didn't intervene. He knew that sometimes healing required space, even amid a storm. Late that night, Daniel reviewed the footage once more. He paused at the moment of the shot, examining angles and lighting. Every calculation led him to the same conclusion. The shooting was unjustified. The officer had acted prematurely, without assessing the situation. Buddy had not been aggressive. Lily had not been in danger. He closed the laptop and looked at his daughter sleeping in the next room, still clutching a toy Buddy had loved. He knew that the coming days would require careful maneuvering. Public pressure, media scrutiny, and police bureaucracy would all challenge them. But Daniel Harper had never faced a challenge he couldn't overcome. Not in war, not in life. And he would not fail now. Because this was not just about a dog. It was about protecting his daughter. It was about standing for what was right. And it was about ensuring that a small town, shaken to its core, understood that truth could not be silenced. By the following morning, Maplewood was transformed. The footage had gone viral nationwide. Pet advocacy groups issued statements. Animal shelters reported increased adoptions in Buddy's honor. Citizens demanded accountability from their local authorities. Even the governor's office acknowledged the situation, requesting a formal report from the department. Inside the Harper home, Daniel sat with his attorney, outlining witness statements, planning calls, and reviewing evidence. "We leave nothing to chance," he said firmly. "Every detail, every frame, every testimony is a piece of the truth, and the truth is on our side." Lily joined them briefly, her small hand in her father's. "Will people see it like we do?" she asked softly. "They will," Daniel promised. "It may take time, but they will. Buddy didn't deserve what happened, and now the world will know." As the sun set on Maplewood, the quiet Ohio town felt the ripple of a storm that had begun in a backyard but now spread far beyond its streets. The video was more than just footage. It was evidence, testimony, and a call to action. Daniel Harper knew that battles like this required patience, strategy, and moral courage. It was no longer just a father seeking justice for his child. It was a community demanding accountability. And with every frame, every witness, every voice, the truth was growing stronger. And somewhere, Daniel allowed himself a small thought. Buddy's story was not over. Not by a long shot. The day of the internal review hearing arrived with a heavy sense of anticipation that swept through Maplewood like a storm. Even at sunrise, the streets were busy with people heading toward the police department, which had been transformed into a temporary venue for the proceedings. News vans lined the sidewalks, reporters hustled with cameras, and townspeople clustered in small groups, holding signs and discussing the case in hushed tones. The #justice for Buddy had dominated social media for nearly a week, and now the town waited for what they hoped would be accountability. Inside the hearing room, tension filled the air. The panel of senior officers sat at a long table, reviewing notes and legal documents. Uniformed staff filed in, taking their seats behind the panel, while a few community representatives were allowed to observe. Daniel Harper and Sarah sat near the front, Lily between them, clutching her father's hand with an intensity that spoke volumes. She had been quiet all morning, nerves twisted tightly in her stomach. Buddy's empty collar lay on the seat beside her like a silent witness. Daniel's attorney, a sharp and seasoned advocate named Melissa Vaughn, whispered instructions into his ear. "Stay calm, stick to the facts, focus on your observations, don't react to emotions in the room, make them see the truth." Daniel nodded slightly, his eyes scanning the room with the precision of a man who had spent decades reading the battlefield. He wasn't here as a soldier, he was here as a father, but the lessons of his military career, the discipline, the clarity of thought, the understanding of risk and threat, would guide him every step of the way. The hearing began with procedural statements, followed by the officer reading his account. He described Buddy as aggressive and charging toward the child, claiming that fear had prompted the shot. His voice was measured, rehearsed. But when the panel and public watched the footage Daniel had provided, every word fell apart. Daniel rose when it was his turn. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't gesture dramatically. He spoke with measured calm, each word deliberate, each sentence precise. "I've spent over 20 years leading special operations in conflict zones," he began, his gaze steady on the panel. "In combat, we are trained to assess threats before taking action. Mistakes can cost lives, but protocol exists for a reason. Every soldier knows that shooting without identifying a legitimate threat is unacceptable. The same standard should apply here. A child and a dog in a yard are not immediate threats. That is what the footage shows." He paused, letting the room absorb his words. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked, and even some members of the panel leaned forward. Buddy was loyal, he was protective, but at no point did he charge aggressively or attack anyone. He moved toward Lily, his owner, because she called him. The shot fired was unprovoked and unjustified. Every frame of video supports this. This is not speculation, it is fact. The room fell silent. Daniel's calm authority carried weight. He wasn't speaking as a father desperate for justice. He was speaking as a strategist and observer, presenting evidence with precision and clarity. Lily's small voice broke through as she whispered, "He was coming to me." Daniel turned slightly, nodding at her, letting her know she was seen and heard. He then continued with the factual recounting, describing the sequence of events minute by minute. He referenced bodycam footage, witness statements, and even 911 call transcripts, pointing out inconsistencies and contradictions. Every point was supported, meticulously documented. The officer responded, defending his actions, repeating that he felt threatened. But each claim crumbled under the weight of Daniel's evidence. The footage contradicted his statements. Witnesses confirmed Buddy's calm demeanor. Even experts reviewing the behavior agreed the dog was not aggressive. Outside the room, a small group of protesters gathered. They watched live coverage on their phones, faces tense, some whispering prayers, others discussing strategy for their petitions. Maplewood had never experienced this level of public scrutiny before. People were talking, debating, and organizing for change. Inside, the tension was palpable. The panel members exchanged glances, scribbling notes. They had seen evidence. They had heard testimony. The truth was clear and it was undeniable. Daniel concluded with a quiet, firm statement. This is not about anger or revenge. It is about ensuring that actions are held to a standard of reason, responsibility, and accountability. Buddy's life mattered. Lily's safety mattered. And the public deserves transparency when those entrusted to protect fail in their duty. That is why I am here today. A murmur of approval swept through the room. Reporters clicked cameras, capturing the moment. Lily leaned against her father, drawing strength from his presence. She understood that this was bigger than grief. It was justice in action. The panel recessed to deliberate. The room emptied slowly, but Daniel and Sarah remained, reviewing notes and discussing next steps. Outside, the crowd had grown. Children held signs with paw prints, neighbors waved banners, and journalists interviewed locals about the impact of the shooting. When the panel returned hours later, the atmosphere was tense. The officer stood, awaiting the verdict. Daniel held Lily's hand tightly. The panel chair cleared his throat, adjusting papers before speaking. After reviewing the evidence, witness statements, and video footage, we find that the officer violated department protocol. The use of lethal force in this situation was unjustified. The officer is terminated effective immediately. Furthermore, policy changes regarding animal-related calls will be implemented to prevent future incidents. Gasps and whispers filled the room. Some reporters smiled, while others scribbled notes furiously. Lily's eyes widened in disbelief. She looked at her father, unsure if she should believe what she had just heard. Daniel knelt beside her, squeezing her hand. "It's over, Lily," he said softly. "Justice has been done." The weight in the room shifted. Relief, sadness, and quiet triumph mingled in the air. Outside, the crowd erupted into applause and cheers, some holding hands and singing songs of support for Buddy's memory. Later, as Daniel and his family left the building, reporters swarmed, asking for statements. Daniel spoke briefly, calmly, without sensationalism. "This was not about vengeance," he said. "It was about truth, about accountability, and about ensuring that every member of our community feels protected, not threatened, by those entrusted with our safety." The words resonated across social media, printed in newspapers and broadcast on television. Maplewood's story, once a local tragedy, had become a national example of accountability, advocacy, and measured justice. Back at home, Lily knelt in the backyard, surrounded by flowers and photographs of Buddy. She placed a small stone at the center of the memorial, whispering a soft goodbye. Daniel watched quietly, understanding that while justice had been served, healing was just beginning. Sarah joined him on the porch. "He's proud of her," she said quietly, referring to Daniel. Daniel nodded. "She's stronger than she knows. Buddy wouldn't want her to break, he'd want her to fight for what's right, and she did." As night fell over Maplewood, a small town once divided, families began to gather in quiet vigil. Candles were lit in memory of Buddy. Signs and flowers decorated porches. Even strangers who had followed the story online posted images and messages, celebrating not just a dog, but the resilience of a child, a family, and a community united in truth. Daniel Harper, decorated commander, battle-hardened strategist, and father, understood that this victory, though small in the grand scope of life, was monumental. It was a testament to patience, precision, and unwavering moral courage. And for Lily, for Buddy, and for Maplewood, it was proof that even in tragedy, justice could prevail. The day after the hearing, Maplewood was buzzing. but in a different way. The streets still carried a hum of excitement and relief, but the tone had shifted from outrage to reflection. Signs that had once demanded justice now remained as silent tributes, paw prints, flowers, and heartfelt notes marking the spot where Buddy had fallen. Local news vans stayed parked outside the Harper home, capturing stories of community solidarity, but the tension that had gripped the town seemed to be easing. Inside the Harper house, Daniel Harper reviewed the official documentation from the hearing. The officer had been terminated, internal protocols were being revised, and the department had publicly acknowledged its failure. For Daniel, this was the start, not the end. In his experience, real accountability required ongoing oversight, community involvement, and a firm plan to prevent repeat mistakes. Sarah sat across from him at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee. "You've done everything right, Daniel," she said softly. "The town, they're listening now. They're finally taking this seriously." Daniel shook his head slightly. "This isn't about me. It's about standards, about accountability. Policies matter more than applause, and the people responsible for protecting this community have to understand the consequences of failing in their duty." Lily, sitting nearby on the couch, picked up Buddy's empty collar. She turned it over in her small hands, tracing the scratches and worn spots. "Dad, will they make sure it doesn't happen again?" she asked quietly, looking up at him. Daniel crouched to her level, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Yes, Pumpkin. This is the first step. New policies are being drafted. Officers will be trained on assessing animals, understanding behavior, and using non-lethal alternatives whenever possible. Buddy's memory will ensure this lesson is not forgotten." The Harper family decided to host a small community meeting in their backyard later that week. They invited neighbors, local officials, animal advocates, and media representatives. The purpose was clear: share the steps being taken for accountability, foster understanding, and create a plan to prevent similar tragedies. By the evening of the meeting, the backyard was filled with people. Children clutched stuffed animals resembling Buddy. Adults stood quietly, some nodding in recognition of the family's courage, others whispering to friends about the changes being promised. Daniel addressed the gathering with calm authority. "Buddy's story is tragic," he began, voice steady, "but it is also an opportunity for us to learn, to improve, and to ensure accountability. The officer involved has been terminated, and the department is implementing new protocols for interactions with animals and children. These steps are concrete measures designed to protect the community and prevent future harm." Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. A local journalist who had followed the case from the start raised her hand. "Colonel Harper, do you feel justice has been done?" Daniel paused, carefully choosing his words. Justice is a process, not a single act. Termination and policy changes are steps in the right direction, but real accountability requires vigilance. We must ensure that policies are followed, training is enforced, and that every officer understands their responsibility to the public and its children. Only then can we say justice has been achieved. Lily stepped forward, carrying Buddy's collar and placing it gently on the small makeshift altar of flowers in the center of the yard. "This is Buddy," she said softly. "He didn't deserve what happened, but we're going to make sure everyone remembers him and what's right." The crowd fell silent. Her words, simple and heartfelt, resonated more powerfully than any report or news article could. For the townspeople, this was not just a story about a dog. It was about integrity, responsibility, and the courage to confront wrongdoing. Following the meeting, the Harper family worked with the local animal control and police departments to develop training sessions for officers. These sessions included how to assess dog behavior accurately, non-lethal methods for controlling animals, and techniques for de-escalating situations involving children and pets. Daniel was hands-on, observing each session, providing input based on his strategic experience, and ensuring the lessons were practical, effective, and enforced. The Harper home became a hub for advocacy. Sarah organized support groups for families who had experienced similar losses. Lily, inspired by the attention Buddy's story had received, began writing letters to local schools about responsible pet ownership, safety, and empathy. Even at 10 years old, she felt empowered, realizing that Buddy's legacy could protect other children and animals. Meanwhile, social media continued to amplify the story. Videos of Buddy, news coverage of the hearing, and footage of the family's community meeting spread nationwide. Pet advocacy groups praised the family, highlighting the case as a model for accountability and reform. Donations and messages of support poured in, not for personal gain, but to honor Buddy's memory and ensure that his story had a lasting impact. Despite the positive developments, Daniel remained vigilant. He reviewed follow-up reports from the police department, monitored training sessions, and stayed in touch with the attorney to ensure all recommendations were being implemented. Accountability isn't a one-day event, he reminded Sarah. It's ongoing. We have to ensure the system works, not just celebrate one victory. Lily watched her father with admiration. "You're like a commander at home too, Dad," she said one evening as they walked in the backyard, the sun setting behind the trees. Daniel smiled faintly. "Every commander has to adapt, Lily. The battlefield changes. Here, our mission is truth and protection, and you're part of that mission too." Over the following weeks, Maplewood began to heal. The initial outrage faded into reflection and community action. Parents spoke with children about safety and respect for animals. Local schools incorporated lessons about empathy and responsibility. Neighborhood watch groups discussed proactive ways to prevent similar incidents. Buddy's story became a catalyst for positive change. In the Harper household, the family kept Buddy's memory alive in small, personal ways. Photos, toys, and collars were displayed prominently. Lily wrote stories and drew pictures, creating a scrapbook that documented his life and the lessons learned from his death. Daniel and Sarah encouraged her, knowing that processing grief through creativity was essential for healing. At night, as the town slept, Daniel often reflected on the past week. He had faced countless battles in his military career, ambushes, firefights, and operations where lives hung in the balance, but nothing had tested him quite like this. Here, the stakes were deeply personal. His daughter's grief, Buddy's memory, and the integrity of a small community were all intertwined. And yet, through patience, strategy, and moral clarity, progress had been made. Daniel looked at Lily sleeping peacefully, Sarah beside him, and the quiet backyard where Buddy had once played. He allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. Accountability had been established. The officer had been held responsible. Policies had changed. And most importantly, his daughter had seen that fighting for what is right can lead to real, lasting change. Tomorrow, they would continue advocating, continue monitoring the system, and continue honoring Buddy's memory. But tonight, for the first time since the shooting, the Harper family allowed themselves to simply breathe, to feel the relief of a small but significant victory. Because accountability wasn't just about punishment. It was about preventing further harm, creating trust, and ensuring that the lessons learned from Buddy's tragic death would endure. And in that quiet moment, Daniel Harper knew that Buddy's legacy was secure, not just in their hearts but in the very fabric of Maplewood. The weeks that followed were quieter, but Maplewood had changed forever. The town streets, once just ordinary paths, now carried a sense of vigilance and shared responsibility. Buddy's story had sparked more than outrage. It had ignited awareness, conversation, and lasting reform. Local schools incorporated lessons on animal safety, empathy, and community responsibility. The police department, under close scrutiny, implemented stricter training programs for officers interacting with animals and children. At the Harper household, life settled into a cautious normalcy. Lily still grieved Buddy, but her sorrow had transformed into determination. Each morning, she would place fresh flowers at the backyard memorial, brush her fingers over Buddy's collar, and whisper stories of his adventures, as if sharing them with the world he had never fully experienced. "Dad," she said one morning, her small voice full of resolve, "I want to make sure Buddy's story helps other kids too, not just me." Daniel smiled, recognizing the spark of leadership in her words. "That's exactly what he would have wanted," he said. "And you can do it. You have a voice, and now people are listening." Sarah, standing nearby, watched with quiet pride. Their family had endured heartbreak, public scrutiny, and intense pressure, but through it all they had emerged stronger. The tragedy had forged an unexpected bond, not just between them but with the community they loved. Lily began writing letters to schools, explaining Buddy's story and advocating for safe interactions with pets. She spoke at school assemblies, carefully recounting the events of that day, emphasizing respect, caution, and empathy. Her young voice, honest and unwavering, moved teachers, students, and even parents. Buddy's life and his tragic death was no longer just a private memory. It had become a teaching tool, a symbol of responsibility and moral courage. Daniel continued his quiet work behind the scenes. He reviewed police protocols, ensured that promised reforms were implemented, and maintained contact with the attorney to monitor the department's compliance. Maplewood was learning, but change required persistence. Daniel Harper, accustomed to leading complex operations with precision and clarity, treated this like any other mission. The stakes were different, but the principles were the same: strategy, patience, and relentless dedication to achieving the objective. One evening, the Harper family gathered in the backyard. Lily had brought out her scrapbook, showing Daniel and Sarah the stories she had written, the drawings she had made, and the photographs she had arranged. Each page was a tribute to Buddy, documenting his personality, his loyalty, and the love he had given freely. "This is incredible, Lily," Daniel said, lifting the scrapbook carefully. "You've turned your grief into something meaningful. Buddy would be proud." "I want other kids to know it's okay to speak up," she said softly. "Even if it's scary. Buddy, he needed me, and I want others to be safe too." Her words hung in the warm evening air. Daniel felt a profound sense of pride, tempered by the memory of that terrible day. The sight of his daughter transforming tragedy into purpose reminded him of the resilience that had defined every mission he had ever led. Word of Lily's efforts spread. Local media interviewed her about her letters and presentations, praising the young girl's courage. Animal welfare organizations invited her to speak at community events. And as she shared Buddy's story, Daniel watched her grow, not just as a child who had endured loss, but as a young advocate for safety, compassion, and justice. Meanwhile, Maplewood continued to embrace change. The police department's training programs became a model for other small towns in Ohio. The department's leadership emphasized accountability, transparency, and the importance of public trust. Citizens felt empowered, understanding that their voices could influence policy and create tangible improvements. Buddy's story had become the catalyst for systemic change. At home, Daniel often reflected on the journey. From the initial shock of the shooting to the viral video, the public outrage, the hearing, and the reforms, he realized that every step had required strategy, patience, and moral courage. But perhaps the most important lesson was personal: the strength of family and the ability to turn grief into action. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel, Sarah, and Lily sat together on the porch. Buddy's collar rested on the railing, a silent emblem of memory and justice. The air was warm, tinged with the scent of flowers and freshly cut grass. The town around them had healed, but the lessons endured. "Dad," Lily said, looking up at him, "do you think Buddy knew how much people would care?" Daniel smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I think he did in his own way," he replied. "Dogs understand love, loyalty, and courage. Buddy showed us all that, even in a short life, you can make a difference. And now, through you, his story continues." Lily leaned against him, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in weeks. "I'm going to keep telling it," she said softly. "And we'll be right here with you," Daniel said, putting an arm around both Lily and Sarah, every step of the way. The following months brought recognition, but no fanfare that distracted from the family's mission. Daniel remained vigilant, ensuring reforms were effective. Lily continued speaking, writing, and advocating, finding purpose in Buddy's legacy. Sarah coordinated local community projects, helping families engage in pet safety and awareness. Together, the Harper family transformed their personal tragedy into a source of hope and education for countless others. Maplewood itself had changed. The once ordinary town now carried a sense of collective responsibility. Residents checked in with one another, discussed safety and empathy openly, and actively supported animal welfare initiatives. The tragic shooting had revealed flaws, but it had also inspired collaboration, understanding, and a stronger sense of community. Years later, Lily Harper would remember Buddy not just as her childhood pet, but as the catalyst for change, the golden retriever who had inspired a town, educated a child, and reminded everyone of the power of courage and truth. She would continue to advocate for animal safety, always keeping Buddy's memory alive in her work and in her heart. Daniel Harper, retired commander but never retired protector, would look back on the incident as one of the most important battles of his life. It was fought not with weapons, but with strategy, patience, and moral conviction. The victory was not only in the termination of an officer or the policy changes implemented, it was in ensuring that Buddy's story and Lily's voice mattered. And for Buddy, though his life had been cut tragically short, the legacy he left behind endured. His courage, loyalty, and love had transformed grief into action, tragedy into reform, and a small Ohio town into a model of accountability and empathy. In the quiet backyard of the Harper home, where Buddy had once run freely, the golden retriever's memory lived on, not just in photographs, collars, and scrapbooks, but in the hearts of those who learned from his story. And as the sun set over Maplewood, Daniel, Sarah, and Lily Harper sat together, knowing that through their love, perseverance, and dedication, Buddy's legacy would never fade. Because true legacy isn't measured in years, it's measured in the lives you touch, the lessons you teach, and the courage you inspire. Buddy's story, once a personal tragedy, had become a beacon of hope, justice, and change for generations to come.